As I sit here tonight in the quiet, isolated solace of the White House, the weight of the day's events presses heavily on my mind. I am aware that history is not made by those who sit idly by, but by those who face the storm head-on. The Cold War, its tensions, its unpredictable currents, is ever at our doorstep, and I can feel its presence in every decision we make. Today, I met with some of my closest advisors and confidants, and I cannot shake the realization that the choices we make now will echo across time. The day began with a morning briefing. McGeorge Bundy, my trusted national security advisor, was there, along with Dean Rusk, our Secretary of State, and Robert McNamara, our Secretary of Defense. They enter my office with the solemnity of men bearing the gravity of the situation. The briefings on Berlin were urgent and disheartening. The Soviets were escalating their rhetoric, and we could already feel the undercurrent of a potential crisis building on the horizon. "Mr. President, it's becoming clear that Khrushchev won't back down," said Dean Rusk, his face etched with concern. "The rhetoric is one thing, but his actions may speak louder. He may test you, Jack, on every front." His words carried the sharp edge of a cold reality, and I could sense the tension in the room thickening. McGeorge, ever the strategist, was quick to respond, his tone measured. "The key, Mr. President, is to maintain control over the situation. We must avoid being boxed into a corner. If we appear weak, it will only invite more aggression. We cannot afford that." His words echoed my mind, and I knew, deep down, that he was right. There could be no room for hesitation now, not if we were to secure our position and preserve our credibility on the global stage. There was a long pause before I spoke, my voice steady, but the weight of the moment was unmistakable. "And what if our strength is misinterpreted? What if Khrushchev sees our resolve as something to provoke further?" I asked, unsure but firm in my inquiry. McNamara, ever the pragmatic mind, took the floor then. "We walk a fine line, Mr. President, but we must act decisively when the time comes. The enemy respects strength, even if it is met with restraint." His words lingered in the air like the quiet before a storm. After the briefing, I withdrew to the Oval Office to gather my thoughts. Alone in the room, I leaned back in my chair, reflecting on the enormity of the responsibility that rested on my shoulders. The Cold War, this never-ending battle for ideological supremacy, hung over us like a cloud that threatened to rain down devastation at any moment. The very survival of nations, the security of our way of life, rested on the decisions we were making. And I, as president, was its focal point. The pressure is unimaginable, and the choices ahead are far from simple. But I must carry the burden. I have chosen this path. Later that afternoon, Senator Mike Mansfield, a man whose steady hand and pragmatic wisdom have always provided me with invaluable guidance, stopped by the White House. Mike's demeanor is always calm, his words measured, and yet I could see the concern in his eyes. "Jack," he began, "I know you're under pressure, but we cannot afford to let the Soviets control the narrative. You've got to let them know that we are prepared to defend our interests." His words were sharp, but underneath the urgency, there was a quiet caution, a reminder that even strength can be a double-edged sword. We spoke for nearly an hour, and as we did, I could not help but feel the weight of every word spoken. Our nation, our values, everything we stand for, seemed to hang in the balance. I couldn't help but wonder if we had the courage to do what was necessary. Would history judge us as cowards, or would we be remembered as men who stood firm in the face of a dangerous enemy? As I listened to Mike, I was reminded of the choices we must make, not just as politicians, but as men of conscience. After my meeting with Mike, I met with Jackie for a late lunch. Her calm, reassuring presence is often my anchor in these turbulent times. She knows the demands of this office, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She asked, "Are you sure about the path you're taking, Jack? This isn't just about diplomacy. This is about war." Her concern is natural, but what can I say to ease her fears? The world is on the edge, and yet we must act as if the path we walk is assured. There is no turning back, once the choice is made. Jackie's words, though, always force me to pause and reflect. She has a way of seeing things clearly, cutting through the fog of politics and focusing on what matters. "We must find a way to remain true to our values," she said, her voice calm but certain. "Strength with integrity." Her words resonate within me as I sit here tonight. The Cold War is not just a matter of military might or political maneuvering. It is about standing firm in the face of adversity while remaining true to the principles that define us. If we allow fear to dictate our actions, then we lose before we even start. As evening settled in, I attended a private gathering at the White House. The small, intimate affair was a welcome reprieve from the relentless discussions of war and diplomacy. Jackie, ever the gracious hostess, welcomed our guests with warmth and ease. There, in the midst of laughter and conversation, I felt a fleeting sense of normalcy, something to cling to amid the rising storm. And yet, beneath the laughter, I couldn't shake the sense of impending danger. Before the night was over, I had another conversation with McNamara. He was more animated than usual. "Jack," he said, as we walked together through the corridors of the White House, "the Soviets are testing us. They are pushing our limits to see what they can get away with. We must remain vigilant." His words were a grim reminder of the precarious position we were in, but they also served as a call to action. The weight of history presses down on us, and it is not enough to simply react. We must be proactive. We must lead with resolve. As I retire for the night, I cannot help but reflect on the enormity of the decisions ahead. The choices we make will shape the course of history, and I am resolute in my commitment to protect this nation and its ideals. But I also know that we walk a fine line, and every decision carries with it the potential to change the world. Tonight, I find myself reminded of the weight of that responsibility, one that I must bear, for there is no other choice. John F. Kennedy.